Time does not flow through us, we are the ones melting away in it. The book The Scratch Post by Stephen King is a bold attempt to illuminate the greatest mystery of life, how we perceive, use, and often lose the one resource that nothing can replace, time. Through a combined lens of neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and everyday stories, the work opens up an approach that is both rigorous and deeply human to this seemingly familiar subject. So, if time is not just the minute hand silently moving on a clock's face but a flow created by our own minds, then the most terrifying question is not how many years we have to live, but how much we have truly lived within that time. We encourage our listeners to buy and read the book to fully appreciate its content. Only by finishing this book will you understand the issues I am recounting. Please buy the book and support the author. And now, let's begin summarizing this book with me. Part 1, The Experience of Time. I used to think I understood time until I stepped into a deep cave. It was a place that seemed to belong to no rhythm of the world above, a place where only the sound of dripping water and thick, enveloping darkness remained. There, the concept of day and night dissolved. I realized that what we often firmly believe in, the rhythm of the clock, the precise hours and minutes, is actually just a thin sheet of ice separating us from an endless ocean of different ways to experience time. I remember Michel Siffry, the 23-year-old young man who entered an ice cave in the Alps in the summer of 1962. He brought food, a tent, and a few essential items, but no watch. He wanted to know what happens when there are no dates, when nothing happens for weeks on end. Hundreds of meters deep inside the mountain, he lived in darkness, with only the faint beam of a flashlight occasionally showing the way. A small spider he once considered a companion eventually died. From then on, he was completely alone. Time passed unconsciously. Siffry would call his support team above to report his daily schedule. He believed only an hour had passed since he woke up, but in reality, it had been 4 or 5 hours. He thought he had just napped for 10 minutes, but in fact, he had slept for over 8 hours. The familiar rhythm disintegrated. In that darkness, he felt both motionless and pulled along by an invisible current. When he was pulled out of the cave after 61 days, he was stunned to realize he had lost 25 days from his memory. Siffry later repeated the experiment, and each time it showed the same result: the human body maintains its own rhythm of about 24.5 hours per day. This is the biological clock, an innate rhythm we cannot resist. Hundreds of students in experiments in Munich yielded similar results. Their days naturally lengthened, making them feel as if they had lost several days upon returning to the normal world. This proves a dual truth: within our bodies, there exists a clock of astonishing accuracy, the biological clock, which might only be off by a few minutes over a lifetime. But parallel to it, consciousness creates another kind of time, internal time. These two types of time do not coincide. Siffry's body maintained a perfect rhythm, but his consciousness was skewed, creating an irreconcilable gap. The question arises, why can't we read this biological clock? The body can regulate blood pressure, secrete hormones, and make us sleepy or awake with near-perfect accuracy, but our consciousness doesn't perceive it directly. To measure an hour, we must rely on memory, comparing it to previous experiences. That's why an hour in a doctor's waiting room feels like an eternity, while an hour on a layover flight feels brief. We rely on memory to judge, and it is memory that makes time fragile. It turns out the present moment never stands still. Every cell in our body has its own clock. Scientists prove this by implanting the glowing gene of a firefly into a fruit fly. Each cell of the fruit fly glowed rhythmically, proving every cell carries a clock. The same is true for humans, trillions of cells, each knowing how to measure time. But if they all ran independently, they would quickly fall out of sync. Therefore, in the brain, there is a small command center located in the hypothalamus, only the size of a grain of rice, but it controls everything. When morning light penetrates our eyelids, this center receives the signal and resets the biological clock. Light is the drumbeat for this massive orchestra. Without it, everything drifts out of sync. This is why people who work night shifts or live in spaces lacking natural light often suffer from disorders, insomnia, depression, and reduced efficiency. Light connects our internal clock to the rhythm of the universe. And it is this rhythm that creates the fundamental difference between one person and another. Some people wake up full of energy as the sun rises, while others are most alert in the middle of the night. We call them early birds and night owls. This difference is not simply a habit, it is written in our genes. Young children often wake at dawn, teenagers become night owls, and the elderly gradually return to an early rhythm. Even our ability to concentrate, our patience, tolerance levels, and the timing of sexual desire follow this biological rhythm. It's strange that we live our entire lives under the control of this rhythm yet are almost completely unaware of it. We only know if we feel alert or tired, excited or lethargic, but few realize that it all follows an invisible schedule. But as soon as we live against our biological rhythm, our body and mind will be worn down, like Balzac, the literary genius who pushed himself to exhaustion with his habit of writing through the night, only to die prematurely at 51. There is a truth we rarely think about: every second we live is measured by an invisible beat in our brain. The composer Ravel, when writing Bolero, unintentionally revealed how internal time operates. The melody repeats over and over, slowly building in intensity, plunging the listener into a hypnotic state, as if each second stretched into infinity. It is in these repetitive rhythms that we realize the brain uses movement to calculate time. Without movement, we lose the ability to estimate. In the brain, a series of small counters operate simultaneously, like a complex orchestra. When we walk, the rhythm of our steps becomes a measure. When we cook, the aroma and the progress of the dish are the clock. Imagine you are making a stew. You know that when that specific aroma rises, about an hour has passed. Internal time, therefore, is not a straight line but a network of countless signals. Each signal is an instrument creating the symphony that plays out in our heads. But this system is fragile. When we wait anxiously, a few minutes can stretch into torture. When we are lost in joy, hours dissolve in a moment. Time can fly like a bird or crawl like a broken-down car. This is not due to the clock on the wall but to the brain, where breath, heartbeat, attention, and emotion regulate every moment. Then another question arises: how long does the present actually last? We often believe we are living in the now. But in reality, consciousness is always a beat behind the real world. When a mosquito flaps its wings, when a flash of light appears, the brain needs a few milliseconds to process it. What we call the present is just a moment that has already passed. Furthermore, experiments show that the brain groups many milliseconds into a present chunk lasting about 3 seconds. That's why when we listen to music, we perceive a continuous melody, not individual notes. But that also means the present we live in is a constructed illusion. Consciousness always lags behind the actual event, as if we are watching a pre-edited film from a few seconds ago. This explains why we often recall a conversation and a moment later realize our brain edited it during the storage process. We are both the audience and the director, reconstructing the present as it flashes by. Ironically, most of our lives pass by in a state of forgetting the moment. The mind often operates on autopilot. We walk down the street without noticing our steps. We talk without remembering the content. Like a pilot switching on autopilot, we let our consciousness wander, and time passes without a trace. Sometimes, only a shock, an unexpected event, startles us into realizing we've lost a whole stretch of our lives. However, memory is the anchor that holds us in this flow. Memory doesn't just store, it creates the very nature of time. Without memory, we have no past and no future, existing only in the present moment. Patients with severe amnesia live in a loop where every day is the first time. They cannot accumulate experiences, nor can they imagine what is to come. Memory turns the present into history and vice versa. It also edits history in the way we want to believe. Each time we remember, the memory is rewritten, with additions or omissions, like a painting with layers of new paint applied over it. That is why time in our minds is never fixed. Childhood can become a vast expanse, while old age can make many years flash by in the blink of an eye. As we grow older, new experiences become fewer. The brain records fewer new impressions, so the later years are compressed into a short sequence in memory. This is why 5 years in middle age can feel as brief as a moment. A paradox emerges: the longer we live, the faster time seems to go. The fewer new experiences we have, the more compressed our memories become. This is the law that makes people, even with long lives, feel that time is too short. The time we perceive is not the steady flow indicated by a clock, it stretches and compresses depending on our attention. Remember the 2 minutes of placing your hand on a hot stove? It feels longer than a lifetime. Whereas 2 hours with someone you love is as short as a breath. Albert Einstein once joked like this to illustrate his theory of relativity, but in reality, this is a daily experience for everyone. Our breathing rate, heartbeat, and physical state become the threads that lengthen or shorten the moment. In a state of anxiety, our breath is short and rapid, the brain receives many small signals, making the moment seem to drag on. Conversely, when we are relaxed, our breath is deep and even, the brain receives fewer signals, and time shortens. Criminals describe that in the moment of committing a crime, a few seconds stretched into an eternity. This very feeling is what engraves every detail into their memory. Conversely, we also know that joy passes so quickly it's hard to grasp. The strange thing is that the brain has the ability to slow down time when we know how to savor it. When we actively prolong a moment by paying attention to every detail, breathing deeply, and letting our eyes and ears record more, time seems to slow down. Conversely, when we let our attention wander, it disappears quickly. Then another question emerges: does the present really exist? Physicists have proven that now is just an illusion. The universe has no single point to mark the present, it is just a small part of a continuous flow. Meanwhile, our consciousness is a beat behind the world. When we hear thunder, the lightning has already flashed. When we read a word, our eyes have already scanned it, and the brain is recreating it. The so-called now is always a little late. Our brain gathers discrete events into a block, just like when we watch a movie, a series of still images projected continuously creates motion. Our present is the same, a product of synthesis. An experimental aircraft can read human thoughts by analyzing brain waves seconds before we actually act. This means that consciousness is not only slow but also not the origin of action. It only receives a report after the decision has been made. It's astonishing. We live in a continuous illusion, believing we are in the present, but that present has already passed by the time we recognize it. And so, memory becomes the foundation. It's not just for storage, memory is the frame that shapes time. We think we remember the past, but in reality, every time we remember, we rewrite it. Pieces are changed, details are erased or embellished. Memory, therefore, doesn't just record time, it creates a new time. Some people lose their memory and live in a permanent present. They cannot connect yesterday with today and have no concept of tomorrow. This is clear proof that humans are the architects of time. We don't just live in time, we create it. And here the discrepancy becomes even clearer. Children live in a wide-open flow, where every day contains countless new experiences. A childhood summer is as long as a lifetime. But as we grow up, new experiences lessen. The brain has less to store, and so the years shorten. We look back on 10 years of youth and see it as long and full of detail, but 10 years of adulthood are just a few faded memories. That is why old age surprises us with how fast time flies. Somewhere in the brain, there is a threshold for a moment. When we are young, this threshold is low, so every new thing crosses it, making time feel longer. As we get older, there are fewer surprises, and time gets compressed. In an experiment, giving a teddy bear to a child shows that time in their head lasts longer. For adults, whose brains are already familiar with it, everything happens quickly. All this leads to a profound realization: time is a product of the brain. It is elastic, distorted, and can be long or short depending on how we live. When we live unconsciously, time is abandoned. How many times have you sat in a conversation while your mind wandered elsewhere, only uttering a few disconnected pleasantries? Or when you walked a familiar street and suddenly realized you had arrived without remembering the journey? Those moments leave no trace in memory, and thus, they disappear from our lives. We live, but not truly live. Just 3 minutes of mindfulness in the present is enough to create a sense of eternity. This may sound small, but it is proof that the quality of time depends on our presence. If we let our minds run after countless streams of thought, the moment is erased. But if we know how to stop, time expands. Then we see memory appear like a frozen river. Without it, we cannot distinguish yesterday from today, nor do we have a concept of tomorrow. Many types of memory exist in parallel. There are short-term memories like fragments and long-term memories like milestones. It is through the continuous transformation of the present into memory that we have a sense of the flow of time. But memory is never absolutely truthful. It is like a patched-up house, where every time we enter, a piece of wood has been replaced, a wall repainted. People who lose the ability to form new memories, like patient HM in medical history, are trapped in an eternal moment. They cannot recount what happened a few minutes ago, nor can they envision tomorrow. Their world is as flat as a blank sheet of paper. Looking at them, we understand that it is memory that allows us to have a past and a future. Memory can also be edited to fit our emotions and desires. Painful memories are faded, while sweet memories are polished. We don't just store, we recreate, like a photographer retouching a photo. We unconsciously add or omit details, making the so-called past a post-processed version. And that is why life is never a chain of objective events but a work edited by ourselves. The perception of time changing with age also stems from memory. A child has countless new things to learn, and every day is filled with strong impressions, which makes time seem to stretch out. Conversely, an adult has fewer new experiences, memory only stores what is familiar, causing many years to be compressed into a short sequence. Therefore, childhood can seem eternal, but old age is just a fleeting breeze. The teddy bear experiment clearly demonstrates this. When children play with a new object, they perceive a longer period of time, their brains register a stronger impression. Adults, familiar with the world, perceive the same period as much shorter. New experiences are the brakes that help slow down time. Repetition makes it speed up. This explains why the journey to an unfamiliar place always feels longer than the journey back. Even though the distance is the same, the first time, the brain has to process a series of new details. On the return trip, everything is familiar, causing us to ignore it, and time is thus compressed. And then, when we pass the halfway point of our lives, we begin to feel like we are being pushed into the final stretch of the race. The feeling that time is shortening is not just because of memory but also because our bodies change. The brain becomes less flexible, and new memories are harder to form. We live more by habit and less by discovery. And so, each year is swallowed up in a moment. There are special places where years seem to stand still, as in the spiritual life of some communities or religions, where a simple, repetitive pace of life makes time a circle. But in modern society, that feeling is rare. The older we get, the faster we feel swept towards the end. A paradox makes us stop and think. The clock on the wall always runs steadily, but the time we live is never aligned with it. When we fall into moments of fascination, several hours vanish without a trace. When we are stuck waiting, every minute passes as heavily as lead. This discrepancy is proof that there are two kinds of time, one belonging to the physical world and one belonging to the human mind. The mechanical clock only counts the rhythm of the present, but consciousness carries with it both the past and the future. Each memory is a frozen piece of time, each plan is a bridge to what has not yet happened. In these actions, we break the linear rule of clock time and create our own dimension of time. Time can also be bent by emotions. When pain lingers, each second seems to be multiplied. When we are happy, it contracts. This discrepancy allows people to complain that time is endless while also lamenting that life is short. Both contradictory statements are true because both stem from subjective experience. Researchers have shown that the brain has a natural limit in processing the present. That now moment actually lasts only a few seconds. Beyond that limit, it has become a memory. Thus, we never truly grasp the present. Just as we think we are living in this moment, it has already slipped into the past. The present is just an illusion created by the brain continuously piecing together discrete fragments into a flow. That is why memory plays the supreme role. We don't just store but also reconstruct the past. Each experience is rearranged, added to, or subtracted from to fit how we see the world. People may remember a traumatic event with fewer details than actually happened or remember a happy memory with more vibrant colors. Memory is not truthful, but it is the only foundation for us to feel that we have lived. If memory is lost, as in some neurological cases, the entire sense of time also disappears. Life becomes a series of disconnected moments, leading nowhere. We see that humans are the creators of time, and memory is the main material. Time is also regulated by age. Childhood is a period where every day is a new world. Each time a child learns a word or a concept, the brain records a strong impression, causing that period of time to lengthen. As adults, we repeat many familiar behaviors. The brain stores less new information, memory compresses, and the years fly by. Therefore, childhood seems endless, while old age is short. There is a reality that makes everyone uneasy: the older we get, the shorter time seems to become. People suddenly realize that a year at age 50 is like the blink of an eye, while a year at age 10 was an entire era. This is not because the clock runs faster but because the brain has changed the way it records memories. Fewer new things mean fewer milestones to distinguish between. Time becomes a smooth block that slips away. In the final years of life, we try to hold back this flow. Many people try to live more slowly, focusing on details, hoping time will stop rushing. But the truth is, the flow never stops. Only when we change the way we live, create new experiences, and pay attention to the present can time expand again. Looking back, it's clear that our entire life is not simply governed by the hands of a clock. We live in two parallel layers of time, one measured by precise machines and one arising from internal perception. This section clearly shows that internal time is what determines how we live, remember, and age. Think of a journey. At the start, everything is new. The scenery hits your eyes with every detail, and the road seems endless. But on the way back along the same route, the brain is already familiar. It ignores many things, making the return trip feel shorter. This is the law of experience. The less novelty, the more time contracts. The brain has a moment threshold. In childhood, this threshold is low, so every detail becomes a memory milestone, making time lengthen. In adulthood, this threshold is high, it takes a truly different event to be recorded. Similar days are compressed into a blurry strip. This is the reason why old age often brings a feeling of time passing uncontrollably fast. And when we look deeper, we see that we are the architects of our own temporal lives. Memory can be modified, the present is always behind reality, and the future is just an imagination. But in this fragility, we still have the power to shape how we experience it. A day can pass like the wind or last as long as a novel, depending on our level of presence. The clock knows neither joy nor pain, but the brain does. The clock doesn't care about memory, but we live by memory. The clock measures every hour as identical, but in the mind, there are hours as long as a year and hours shorter than a breath. This section opens up a fundamental truth: there is no single objective time that governs all of human life. We carry within us many biological and conscious clocks, each running at its own pace. When the morning light touches our eyes, our bodies are reset. When we are immersed in a beautiful piece of music, the brain measures each moment by its rhythm. When we recall a memory, we travel back to a time that no longer exists. These discoveries not only shake our belief in the absoluteness of the clock but also give us a new perspective. We can shape our experience of time by changing our attention, creating new experiences, and living in harmony with our biological rhythm. Otherwise, we will be swept away by the illusion that life is too short, when in fact, the problem lies in how we experience each moment. Time is not just the background, it is the material from which we weave our lives. Only those who realize this can truly live. Part 2, Using Time. The feeling of being caught in a whirlwind of speed is not a disease unique to the internet age. Nearly 200 years ago, Goethe lamented that the world was becoming too fast for anyone to have time to reflect. That statement has not aged, on the contrary, it still accurately reflects our lives today. It seems the more modern we become, the more we fall into the obsession with acceleration. But the big question remains, how fast can the human body and mind endure before they break? We delight when cars go faster, when news arrives instantly, when our work schedules are packed with no gaps. Yet, the line between excitement and exhaustion is very thin. Since the mechanical clock appeared and spread, it has not only measured but also become a moral yardstick. In the 18th century, a pocket watch was not just a tool to tell time but also a symbol of reliability and punctuality. People began to be bound by the rhythm of the clock's hands, and from then on, tardiness was considered a fault. Society produced invisible pressures forcing everyone to run faster. The irony is that the more we want to save time, the more we lose it. People try to multitask, forcing themselves to speed up in every activity. But speed does not always bring efficiency. The body and brain have biological limits. When exceeded, performance drops, concentration shatters, and a sense of helplessness sets in. Science has shown that the three factors that make us always feel short on time are difficulty concentrating, stress, and chronic fatigue. Among them, divided attention plays the leading role. Our brain is like an intention manager, constantly having to choose between countless signals from the world and from within. Each decision consumes energy, making us tired. To-do lists and detailed plans seem to help us take control, but in reality, they are helpless against the complexity of real life. Imagine a sushi chef. He stands before dozens of types of fish, vegetables, rice, and spices. If he had to list everything in his head, he would be a mess. But in reality, his brain processes automatically, focusing on the right moment, the right movement, the right dish. He knows when to slice, when to roll, when to serve. The brain's attention doesn't follow a checklist but the flow of the work. Our brain is the same, it doesn't operate like a computer but like an improvising artist. But that is precisely why it is easily distracted. Just a small signal, a phone ringing, a text message, a fleeting thought, is enough to pull our attention away from the task. And every time we lose focus, we need time to get back on track, interrupting the flow. This is why we often find time shortened, work piling up, and the feeling of being short on time increasing. Not only is it difficult to concentrate, but acceleration also brings stress. We are not simply stressed because of too much work, but because we are always facing the clock. Every time we see the second hand ticking, we feel like we are falling behind. This creates a specific type of stress, time pressure. Unlike stress from an accident or a major event, time pressure erodes us gradually, causing a rapid heartbeat, short breath, and a confused mind. However, a lot of work does not always mean stress. Studies show that the feeling of control is what decides. A person can work from morning to night and remain healthy, as long as they feel they are actively choosing to do so. Conversely, just being forced to follow a rigid schedule, even with a moderate workload, is enough to cause burnout. This is why many societies are experimenting with new ways of allocating time. Some companies pay based on goals rather than hours, allowing employees to decide when and how to complete their work. Some cities design flexible daycare centers and social services so parents are not bound by rigid time frames. The result, satisfaction increases, and the feeling of being short on time subsides. However, we also realize that mastering time is not just a matter of policy but also lies in internal motivation. When we have clear goals, guided by positive emotions about the future, we can maintain focus and energy persistently. When the goals are vague, we easily give in to immediate pleasure, and time slips away. Neuroscientists call these future-oriented emotions somatic markers, signals in the body that make us feel excited or apprehensive, thereby guiding our decisions. If a future reward is vivid enough, the body will create a positive response that helps us persevere. If the future is vague, we ignore it and choose short-term fun. Therefore, the art of mastering time is the art of making the future clear and appealing in the present. The sense of time is not only distorted by work but also by social relationships themselves. When we live in a network that constantly demands responses, calls, emails, text messages, appointments, we fall into a state that researchers call perpetual interruption. Each interruption, though small, adds up to an endless stream. The consequence is that personal time is eroded. We always feel like we don't have enough room to breathe. An easy-to-see proof is the change in work culture. In the 19th century, workers clocked out and left the factory. The rest of the day belonged to them. But today, with smartphones, the boundary between work and rest has almost disappeared. Private time is dissolved into the stream of work, making the feeling of being short on time persistent. To cope, many people choose to multitask, doing one thing while doing another. But multitasking is actually an illusion. The brain cannot process two complex streams of thought at the same time. It just switches back and forth very quickly between them. And each time it switches, we lose focus, leading to lower performance and increased stress. The result is that we lose more time instead of saving it. Many studies show that happiness does not depend directly on the amount of work but on the ability to enter a state of flow, a state of deep concentration to the point of forgetting time. In that state, everything flows smoothly. The challenge is just enough to be engaging but not so difficult as to cause frustration. Paradoxically, at that time, we no longer clearly perceive time, but when we look back, we see that period as full of meaning. So the problem is not how much time we have, but how we use it. People who live in a state of flow often feel their days are longer, while those who are constantly interrupted will find their days shrink. Therefore, to have more time, the right path is not to speed up but to re-establish the conditions to enter a state of flow. Here, motivation plays a core role. Every time we face a decision, the body sends signals, a racing heart, sweaty palms, a feeling of restlessness or excitement. These reactions are not random but are the language of the body helping us shape our choices. Science calls them somatic markers. They are the bridge between past memories and future actions. For example, a person who once missed an important deadline will carry that memory in the form of a somatic marker. The next time they face a similar situation, the body will send a warning signal, making them more cautious. Conversely, a memory of success will leave a feeling of excitement, encouraging us to continue on the chosen path. This somatic marker explains why some people can persevere with long-term goals while others easily give up. If the future does not evoke emotion in the present, it becomes vague and cannot compete with immediate pleasure. Therefore, an important art of living is learning to make the future vivid, so that it knocks on the door of our present emotions. Once a future goal is linked to strong emotions, we will find that time opens up more. Instead of being caught in the vortex of not having enough hours, we feel we have the space to move forward. At that point, time is no longer an enemy to flee from but an ally, a flow we can ride. But there is another enemy that makes us waste time: procrastination. Almost everyone has experienced having an important task to do but choosing smaller, more trivial activities to avoid it. The brain prefers immediate rewards, so it easily falls for distractions while the big task keeps getting pushed back. Procrastination creates the illusion that we have more time, but in reality, it makes us more stressed as the deadline approaches. Procrastination is not just a bad habit but the result of a struggle in the brain. On one side is the emotional system, which likes short-term rewards. On the other side is the rational region, which knows that long-term goals are more important. When emotions overwhelm, we procrastinate. Only when reason finds a way to breathe life into the future, turning a dry task into something meaningful and emotional, can we break the loop. Procrastination is often associated with guilt. We know we are wasting time but continue to do so. This creates a vicious cycle. The more guilt we feel, the more we try to escape, causing the work to pile up even more. Psychologists call this the procrastination trap, a self-sustaining mechanism in which the fear of failure makes us avoid important work even more. The way out is not self-blame but changing the way we view the task. When we turn a job into something that can be broken down, is clear, and has rewards for each completed step, the brain finds it easier to get involved. Instead of having to swallow the whole elephant, we just need to take small bites. This helps the brain associate the task with short-term rewards, breaking the pull of procrastination. In parallel, another important factor shaping our perception of time is self-control. People who practice this ability, from delaying small gratifications to achieve larger goals, are often more successful not only in their careers but also in their health and relationships. Self-control is like a brake that helps us regulate our speed on the journey of life, not letting ourselves be carried away by fleeting impulses. However, self-control is not continuous self-coercion. The brain needs rewards to maintain motivation. If we are too strict, we will soon burn out and fall back into procrastination. The trick here is to create a rhythmic system, knowing when to push, when to relax, and when to rest to regenerate energy. Time also bears the deep imprint of emotion. We can remember a day full of happy and sad events very clearly, while a whole month of tranquility disappears from memory. This reflects a rule: time only becomes lived time when it is connected to emotion. Without emotion, memory becomes pale, and life is compressed. This fact reveals a paradox: sometimes it is the moments of stress and suffering that make life feel denser. In times of danger, every second seems to lengthen, all senses are sharpened, and the brain remembers details. Looking back later, we see that period as an era, while peaceful days pass by leaving almost no trace. This explains why many people seek out risky adventures, even suffering. It's not because they like pain, but because they want to live in the dense flow of time. Extreme experiences, whether positive or negative, have the ability to engrave time into memory, making life richer. But for this very reason, fear becomes the most powerful distorter of time. When we are afraid, time stops in our perception, each moment stretches out endlessly. This is a survival mechanism. The brain needs extended time to process a dangerous situation. But if fear becomes a permanent state, as in chronic anxiety or stress, life becomes a series of heavy, tiring hours and minutes. Science shows that stress causes the body to produce cortisol, a hormone that makes us highly alert. In the short term, it is useful, but if maintained for a long time, cortisol destroys nerve cells in the hippocampus, where memories are stored. This means that prolonged anxiety not only makes time feel heavy but also makes us lose the ability to remember well. From there, the perception of time becomes even more distorted. A dangerous spiral forms: the more anxious we are, the poorer our memory becomes, and the more compressed time feels, making life even more empty. Escaping this spiral requires rebalancing and restoring positive experiences, living in the present instead of letting a vague future haunt us. At this point, an idea emerges: the present moment is not a vague philosophy but a neurological mechanism. When we focus on the present, the sound of the wind, the rhythm of our breath, the light, the brain switches to a different mode, reducing stress and expanding the sense of time. The present becomes a haven, a safe land between the two torrents of the past and the future. Living in the present also means we regain control over time. Instead of letting the past dominate memory or letting the future cast a shadow of anxiety, we pull time back to this moment, the only place we truly exist. This not only brings peace but also helps time become richer and denser. Another factor that shapes our perception of time is attention. Where we place our attention, that is where time becomes vivid. When we focus on a task, the clock may run fast in our eyes, but memory retains many details, making that time seem longer when we look back. Conversely, when we let our consciousness wander, we feel that time drags on, but it leaves no memory. Therefore, the secret to living more is not to extend lifespan but to extend experience by directing our attention. Every time we concentrate fully, we are doubling, even tripling our time. That is why artists, scientists, and athletes often describe a state of flow. They lose the sense of time passing, but in reality, they are living densely in every moment. In contrast, boredom shrinks lived time. While experiencing it, boredom makes us feel every minute lasts forever. But looking back, memory has nothing to store, making that period almost disappear. This is why the monotonous days of repetitive work, after many years, almost become a blank space in the memory of a person's life. We often think that boredom is the enemy, but it is also a signal. It reminds us that life is lacking novelty, that we need a push to break the loop. If we know how to listen, boredom can become a motivation to seek new experiences, create new memories, and stretch our lived time. The perception of time also differs markedly in different stages of life. In childhood, a year is a whole universe of experience because everything is new. In adulthood, a year becomes a series of familiar repetitions, shortened in memory. In old age, time seems to fly by. A decade can pass in the blink of an eye. All this is not because objective time changes but because the amount of new experience gradually decreases. But age does not necessarily mean short time. People who maintain curiosity, try new things, and learn continuously can still feel that life is as dense as when they were young. The secret is not in the number of years we have but in the density of experience we put into each year. In the modern world, busyness is often seen as a sign of success. But in fact, being busy does not mean living a lot. Many people cram their schedules full and end up remembering nothing about that time. Because when we are too busy, we live on autopilot, no longer paying attention. Time is compressed, turning into a blurry mass. Therefore, unconscious busyness becomes a more frightening thief of time than laziness. At least laziness sometimes makes us notice the spare moments, while endless busyness swallows up life, leaving behind an empty memory. Here a paradox is revealed: to have more time, we must know how to let go instead of racing against the clock. Create space. In that space, attention returns, memory returns, and time expands. In other words, the true value of time is not in the number of hours we use but in the quality of our presence. An hour lived fully can be richer than a whole week lived unconsciously. And it is that choice that is the greatest power of human beings over time. Once we realize that the quality of time is more important than the quantity, the big question arises: how to improve that quality? Here, cognitive science offers an interesting suggestion: observe how the brain processes memory. The brain does not store time like a linear film. It only selects the highlights: a long trip, a meeting, an achievement, or even a traumatic event. The rest is erased. Therefore, to make life longer, we need to create more highlights for our memory. A year with many milestones will be remembered as a long year, while a year that passes with few events will be shortened in the mind. Even small things can become highlights, as long as we attach attention and emotion to them: a sunset watched carefully, a deep conversation, trying a strange dish for the first time. The key is not the greatness of the event but the wakefulness in living it. In the flow of time, the feeling of being short on time often comes from a deep-seated cause: the disharmony between what we are doing and what we consider meaningful. If we are constantly busy with things that are not connected to our personal values, whether our schedule is empty or full, we still feel robbed of time. Conversely, when we live in accordance with our values, even hardship becomes fulfilling. Many people believe that high productivity is the key to conquering time, but the truth is more complicated. Productivity only has meaning when it serves a meaningful goal. Otherwise, it just makes us go faster on a meaningless road. And at the end of the journey, we realize we have missed our entire life. The synchronization between our internal rhythm and the outside world becomes a key factor. If we live against our biological rhythm, such as working long nights and sleeping during the day, our body and mind quickly become exhausted. Research shows that people who have to work night shifts have a higher risk of heart disease, mental disorders, and even reduced life expectancy. This is not just a health issue but also how we perceive time. A day with a disrupted biological rhythm makes each hour feel twice as heavy. This leads to the conclusion: to live longer, we need to pay attention not only to what we do but also when we do it. Working, resting, creating, relaxing, all need to be in harmony with our natural biological rhythm. Time is not a straight line outside of us but a rhythm that we can play along with. In fact, all cultures have sought ways to integrate the rhythm of human life with the rhythm of nature. Festivals, seasons, religious rituals, all form a system that helps individuals feel connected to a larger time. In modern society, when many of these rhythms disappear, we easily feel lost, as if life is just a soulless ticking clock. Modern science, through a strange circle, brings us back to ancient wisdom: to live more fully, we need to re-establish rhythms. A meal at the right time, a deep sleep, a day of work and rest interspersed reasonably. It seems simple, but this is the key to expanding lived time. From this perspective, time no longer appears as an enemy but as a partner. It is both strict and generous. It rewards wakefulness and punishes carelessness. It shortens the unconscious life but endlessly expands the meaningful life. And the choice belongs to us, in every moment. To fully feel the flow of time, we need to understand a fundamental truth: there is never a lack of time, only our attention is scattered. The more we are drawn into distraction, the more we feel life slipping through our fingers. And when we lose control of our attention, we also lose control of time. Neurological studies show that in the moments we lose ourselves in wandering thoughts, the brain operates as if it were asleep. It does not create new memories, nor does it increase the feeling of being alive. This explains why a day spent unconsciously disappears completely from memory, making us feel that time has been stolen. In contrast, mindfulness turns a moment into an eternity. When we are fully present, every second is clearly engraved, becoming a dense part of memory. At this level, time is no longer measured by a clock but by the level of wakefulness. Science also confirms an important point: memory and emotion are always linked. What we remember longest is not what happens regularly but what carries strong emotion. It could be unexpected joy, fear, elation, or even sadness. Thanks to emotion, that time is deeply engraved in memory, making life seem longer. Therefore, to expand time, we need to live an emotionally rich life. This does not mean chasing drama or constant stimulation, but cultivating sensitivity to the small fluctuations of daily life. When we know how to listen to our emotions, even an ordinary day can become an epic poem. Here a paradox emerges: it is the limitation of time that makes it precious. If time were endless, we would lose the ability to appreciate it. Death, instead of being a destroyer, becomes the gatekeeper, reminding us that every moment is unrepeatable. And it is this finiteness that turns every minute into an absolute. That is also why when facing death, many people suddenly see life more clearly than ever before. They realize what they lacked was not more years, but presence in the years that have passed. And that wakefulness can come to anyone, not necessarily waiting until the end of life. All that the science of time wants to say ultimately comes back to one point: we can double or triple our lives if we know how to live with attention, emotion, and rhythm. Objective time does not change, but subjective time, the time we actually experience, can be expanded infinitely. If there is any secret of time, it is this: every moment is a door. Enter it unconsciously, and we lose everything. Enter it with wakefulness, and we have all of eternity. Part 3: What is time? The journey to Jamaica began with a very simple curiosity: is there a single clock for the entire universe, a single hand that is unshaken by any circumstance? In our imagination, there seems to be a universal beat, a standard time that transcends all differences. But when we delve into specific experiences, we realize that even a clock is a product of its conditions. In Jamaica, the sun rises and sets differently than in Europe. Biological rhythms and social habits shape a completely different perception of time. This raises the question, does an absolute, uniformly flowing time truly exist? Science once affirmed that it could. For centuries, time was considered a solid foundation, flowing steadily like a ceaseless river. Newton built this image, an absolute time, independent of all objects and events. But then the 20th century challenged this belief. Einstein's special theory of relativity abolished the notion of a universal clock. Instead, each frame of reference has its own rhythm, each observer carries a clock that cannot be swapped. This idea was shocking because it went against everyday intuition. But let's imagine a light clock. If light travels between two mirrors, creating beats like a clock's hand, what happens when the entire device moves at high speed? For a stationary observer, the light ray must travel a longer diagonal path to reach the mirror. This means the beat slows down, the moving clock runs slower. And this is not just a mental game, it has been proven by countless experiments, from subatomic particles moving in accelerators to atomic clocks placed on jet planes. This leads to a paradox. If you were to travel with a friend on a spaceship flying near the speed of light, upon returning to Earth, you would find yourself younger than those who stayed behind. Time has dilated with speed, and this slowing down is not an illusion. It truly changes how physical processes occur, from the beating of a heart to the decay of a particle. If we continue this line of reasoning, we see that even the direction of travel makes a difference. When we travel east, in the direction of the Earth's rotation, we move faster through space, and our clock runs slightly slower. Conversely, if we travel west, we are going against the rotation, and our clock will run faster. Of course, the difference is tiny, but it is measurable with precise instruments. This means that at a micro level, we are not just moving through space but also shaping the speed at which time flows around us. Another layer of meaning appears when we change altitude. A clock on a mountaintop does not run at the same rate as a clock in a valley. Here, gravity enters the game. The general theory of relativity shows that gravity bends spacetime, and the closer you are to a center of gravity, the slower time flows. A pilot who lives their entire life at high altitude will, according to their biological clock, age faster than someone living on the ground. This was once considered a paradox but has now become a fundamental fact. The Global Positioning System, GPS, must constantly adjust the clocks on its satellites to compensate for errors caused by time dilation due to speed and gravity. Without this correction, maps would be off by kilometers after just one day. From this, we are forced to accept that the concept of a common present for everyone is just an illusion. For two observers at different points, events can occur in a different order. What one person calls now, another might consider before or after. Thus, the linear flow we are accustomed to only exists within the scope of our daily experience. The universe, when examined closely, does not follow any common timeline. But if that's the case, why do we still feel a distinct arrow of time? A broken cup only falls to the floor, it never reassembles itself. Here, we enter the world of thermodynamics. Entropy, the measure of disorder, can only increase. The universe began in a highly ordered state, and since then, all processes have led to greater disorder. It is this asymmetry that creates the one-way feel of time. From a broken teacup to the expanding universe, the arrow always points toward increasing entropy. The deeper we go, the more we reach the limits of our perception. When time is scaled down to 10 to the power of -43 seconds, called Planck time, the entire concept of space and time collapses. There, the familiar laws of physics no longer apply. We cannot say what happens before or after. This is not just a problem of measurement but a limit of the very structure of reality. And it is at this ultimate point that a new possibility is revealed. If time is no longer an objective flow, then what we call passing is just the way our minds organize the world. Perhaps time is just an illusion, a tool for us to navigate the chaos, not an invisible string binding all things. The next question is, if time can stretch and shrink depending on velocity or gravitational fields, what is its true nature? Is time just a secondary attribute of space, an additional axis for us to describe motion? Or is time an independent entity, existing alongside matter? When Einstein introduced his theory of relativity, he unified space and time into a single fabric, spacetime. In this structure, every event has its place, like points on a giant canvas. The expansion of the universe, the movement of planets, and even the smallest oscillations of subatomic particles are all lines drawn on this canvas. And if you look at it this way, the flow of time that we perceive is simply the way consciousness follows one line among countless possibilities. However, this idea leads to a difficult paradox. If all events are already laid out in the spacetime fabric, from past to future, then where is free will? Is life just a pre-recorded movie, and we are just experiencing it frame by frame? This question is unavoidable because once time is seen as another dimension of space, the distinction between happening now and will happen loses its absolute meaning. To escape this impasse, many scientists turn to quantum mechanics. At the micro level, the world does not operate like a predetermined machine. Particles do not have a definite position and velocity but exist only as probabilities. An event only becomes real when it is observed or interacted with. Some argue that it is this uncertainty that opens a space for freedom. Yet, quantum mechanics further destabilizes the concept of time. In its fundamental equations, time no longer plays a prominent role. It appears only as an external parameter, not an essential component. This leads to a strange prospect: perhaps at the deepest level, time does not exist. The world is just a network of relationships, and what we call before and after are just conventions that arise from our macroscopic experience. When physicists try to reconcile relativity with quantum mechanics, the goal of quantum gravity theory, the notion of time is challenged even more intensely. There are equations that describe the universe in which time completely disappears. The reader may find this hard to believe, but try to imagine, we watch a movie with a character in it. For the character, time is real, moments follow one another, events happen in a sequence. But for an outside observer, all the frames are already on the film reel. The character does not know that their entire fate has been recorded. The universe may be like that. However, the core question remains: if time is just an illusion, why does it affect us so profoundly? Why do we age? Why do all things decay? Part of the answer lies in entropy. The second law of thermodynamics states that all closed systems tend toward a state of greater disorder. It is this increase in entropy that creates the irreversible arrow of time. Even if the fundamental equations do not distinguish between past and future, in reality, no one ever sees broken glass reassemble itself into a cup. Furthermore, the human mind contributes to reinforcing the illusion of flow. The brain not only records events but also arranges them in order. Memory forces us to see life as a linear sequence. And because memory always accumulates backward, we cannot avoid the feeling that we are moving forward. This constraint makes time an inescapable subjective experience, even if at the physical level it may be an illusion. From here, a new perspective opens up. Perhaps time is not a single thread running through all events but a fabric woven by our minds to understand the world. This makes us uneasy, but it also suggests a strange power. If time is a product of consciousness, then the way we experience it can be completely changed. One of the greatest challenges in modern physics is to connect two theoretical systems: Einstein's general theory of relativity, which describes the universe on a vast scale, and quantum mechanics, which explains the world at the level of tiny particles. Both are correct within their own domains but contradict each other when applied simultaneously. And it is at this intersection that the question of time becomes most thorny. In the quantum world, the concept of temporal order becomes blurry. Particles can exist in a state of superposition, where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously. Only upon observation does one outcome become reality. But this makes us ask, before being observed, what is the particle's time? Is there a before and after in a world of probability? Many researchers suggest that this uncertainty implies that time is not a continuous flow but a collection of discrete steps, like individual frames in a film. If this is true, then what we perceive as a continuous flow is merely the smoothness of our perception. Reality itself may be a series of discontinuous jumps. Another hypothesis is that space and time are not fundamental but are emergent properties of more basic entities. Perhaps at the deepest level, the universe is composed of relationships, nodes of information, like a network of connections. From this network, space, time, and even matter are just images that are constructed, like a three-dimensional illusion in a light show. Alongside these theories, the concept of entropy still plays a central role. As all events gradually move toward a state of greater disorder, we get a sense of an irreversible flow. Ice melts, a house collapses, a body ages, all go in one direction. It is this asymmetry that gives time its arrow, and while many fundamental physical equations are time-symmetric, our daily reality is always governed by the law of entropy. This gives rise to a startling truth: the arrow of time we perceive, instead of being a property of the universe, may just be a consequence of the one-way perspective of human beings. Because we are living organisms in an open system, always consuming energy and producing chaos, our experience of time is tied to the flow of entropy. If there were no increase in chaos, perhaps we would not be able to perceive the past as different from the future. And this forces us to confront an even deeper paradox. If time is just a product of entropy and consciousness, what will happen when the universe reaches its final state of thermodynamic equilibrium, what cosmologists call the heat death? At that point, there will be no distinction between order and disorder, no more processes can occur. Time, in the sense we understand it, will also disappear. The universe will become an endless, silent sea. Thinking about that, one can't help but shudder. All of history, all joy and pain, everything that has been and will ultimately move toward absolute silence. And in that prospect, time suddenly reveals its nature, not an eternal entity but a finite phase of the universe. However, what is astonishing is that it is this very finiteness that makes every moment of life precious. If time never ended, perhaps we would never know the value of an hour, a day. The death of the universe, like individual death, is not just an end but a mirror that reflects the value of the present. At a deeper level, physicists and philosophers are beginning to agree on one point: the so-called flow of time is not an objective property of the world but a structure of consciousness. We are dreamers, viewing the universe through a linear lens. And once we understand that, we are forced to face a paradoxical truth: time both does not exist and is the only thing we have. The deeper scientists delve into the nature of time, the more they discover that the very way we experience reality has shaped our concept of it. The brain not only records a flow of events passing by but also actively constructs the notion of before and after, of cause and effect. Thanks to this, we can live in an ordered world instead of a chaotic one. But this order may just be a temporary arrangement that consciousness erects to help us navigate. Neuroscience experiments show that when the brain processes stimuli, it often delays for a few milliseconds before piecing them together into a coherent picture. This means that the experience of the present, which we believe is happening right now, is actually always the recent past. The present in the absolute sense is never reachable. This shakes our belief in the certainty of now to its core. Even the memories we store of the past are not intact film clips. They are more like mosaics that the brain constantly edits and reconstructs. Each time we remember, the memory is slightly altered, with additions or subtractions. And so, the past we cling to is ultimately just a construction, not the reality that once was. From this, the question arises: if the present is an illusion and the past is a fiction, what creates the flow of time within us? The answer lies in anticipation. It is the ability to look toward the future, to imagine it, to prepare for it, that creates the experience of a continuous flow. When we stop anticipating, time within us also stops. This explains why in a state of depression, when people lose the ability to hope, they also lose their sense of time. Another discovery is also startling: in certain special states of consciousness, the perception of time can be completely reversed. People in deep meditation or who have near-death experiences often report that they escaped the flow of time, where all events happen simultaneously. There is no before or after, only a complete presence. These experiences, though difficult to verify scientifically, open up another perspective. Perhaps the flow of time is not inevitable but just one way the normal mind operates. Eastern philosophy has long emphasized this aspect. Buddhism sees time as an illusion, where all phenomena arise and cease in an instant, and the eternal present is the only reality. The metaphor of a drop of water falling into a river, the moment it touches the surface, it is both itself and dissolved into the whole. This integration shows that time only exists as long as we cling to separateness. From a Western perspective, Augustine once confessed that he knew what time was when he wasn't asked, but when he had to define it, he was completely bewildered. This remains true today. We feel time every moment, but when we try to grasp it, it slips through our fingers. It is not an object, nor is it energy, but the frame in which all things exist. But does this frame exist objectively, or is it just a product of the mind? In these debates, one thing is obvious: humans cannot live without the concept of time, whether it is an illusion or a reality. It is still the red thread that connects our experiences. And the paradox is that it is precisely when we understand that time may just be a product of consciousness that we see more clearly our power to shape it. If time is a construction, then we can construct it differently. We can slow down by paying attention or make life longer by expanding our experiences. We don't need to change the universe, just the way we see and feel. So, in the end, what is time? On the one hand, it is the ceaseless operation of the physical world, of entropy, of the expanding universe. On the other hand, it is a structure erected by consciousness, where past, present, and future are intertwined. And in this overlap, human life appears as a song that is both finite and infinite. When science tries to measure time, it discovers that the measuring tool itself defines the experience. Sundials, hourglasses, mechanical clocks, and then atomic clocks, all not only help us divide time but also change the way people live. When the mechanical clock appeared in medieval monasteries, it created an invisible revolution. The hours of prayer, labor, and rest were strictly fixed. From then on, time became a unit of discipline, forcing people to comply. Today, atomic clocks allow us to determine time with an accuracy of a billionth of a second, but in return, we fall into a fierce dependency. Every appointment, flight, and financial transaction is anchored to this absolute precision. We no longer live by the rising sun or the seasons but by the blinking second hand. The more precise it becomes, the more alien, rigid, and distant time feels from the natural rhythm of life. However, at the physical level, the very notion of temporal order is not absolute. Einstein's theory of relativity shows that time flows slower or faster depending on the speed of movement and gravity. This means there is no universal clock for everyone. Each person, each planet, each particle of light carries its own flow of time. More paradoxically, quantum physics reveals another truth: at the microscale, past and future are no longer clearly distinguished. Elementary particles can exist in a state of superposition, where they are both here and there, both happening and not yet happened. Only when there is an observation does the possibility collapse into reality. This raises the question: does time really flow, or is it just an illusion created by observation? In cosmological theories, some scientists even suggest that time may not exist at the most fundamental level. It only appears as an emergent property when particles and energy arrange themselves into complex orders. If so, time is not a foundation but just a byproduct of the universe's operation. However, for humans, these debates do not change the fact that we still live with the perception of day and night, of youth and old age. Whether time is an illusion or a reality, it still determines our fate. That is why the greatest fear is not in not understanding time but in losing it. This obsession is engraved in human language: we spend time, save time, waste time, as if it were a currency. This comparison reflects how modern society views time as a scarce resource, even more precious than gold or silver. But unlike money, time cannot be stored, borrowed, or returned. Every passing second is gone forever. Ironically, the more we see time as a possession, the more stressed we become for fear of losing it. People plan meticulously, note every task in their calendar, and use reminders so as not to miss anything. And in the effort to manage time, they lose the naturalness of life. The clock becomes the master, and we become the slaves. But in this, an opportunity opens up. If we change our perspective, we can turn time from a ruler into an ally. Instead of calculating, we can learn to feel. Instead of forcing, we can learn to attune. Then, time is no longer something that passes coldly but a flow that carries us into growth and experience. This means the core lesson is not in adding time but in living in tune with it. Science can measure, physics can debate, but each person must still define how they want to pass through this flow. If we look back at the journey of humanity, we see that all of human culture is an effort to cope with the finiteness of time. Myths were born to explain death and promise immortality. Religions built eternal realms where the soul continues to exist after the body decays. Science seeks to extend lifespan, delay aging, and dream of reaching biological immortality. But at a deep level, all are reactions to the fear of losing time. This is reflected in the desire to leave a mark. The artist creates a work, parents leave behind children, the powerful erect monuments and write histories, all want to overcome their short limits with a form of extended memory. This shows that the fear of death is not just a fear of nothingness but also a fear of being erased from the flow of humanity's memory. And memory, once again, becomes the bridge between finite time and a sense of eternity. Memory turns a short life into a story with a thread, with meaning. Thanks to memory, we can relive a lost moment, making it exist longer than its own physical substance. In this sense, memory is the only form of immortality we truly possess. But memory is also fragile. It is distorted by emotion, faded by time, and restructured each time we remember. This truth can make us uneasy, but it also opens up a freedom. We can recreate our lives by restructuring our memories. This doesn't make time longer, but it makes it richer in meaning. The final paradox that the book wants to pose is that we cannot conquer time by accumulating or resisting it, but only by living in it. This means letting go of the illusion of absolute control, accepting finiteness as part of the game, and enjoying every moment. If the clock is a great product of civilization, then knowing when to stop looking at the clock is also a great art. That is when we stop being obsessed with the flashing numbers and let our breath, our heartbeat, and the natural flow of life guide us. In those moments, time is no longer a threat but a companion. Science, with all its precision and data, can explain the neurological mechanisms, the physical structure, or calculations about the universe, but there is one thing it cannot measure: the feeling of being alive. It is this feeling that determines how much time we have owned in our lives. A person can live 80 years and feel their life was short, while another lives only 30 years but feels full because every day was experienced deeply. So the final question is not how much time we have, but how we live in that time. The secret of time lies in the fact that it is not outside of us but in the very way we see, feel, and live. And that is the only thing we can hold in our hands. If one day we are forced to let go of everything, perhaps what remains is not the number of years that have passed but the moments we were truly present. And then we realize that time is not a thief but the one who gave us the only gift, the gift of life. Thank you for joining me on the journey of this book, a journey not only to discover time but also to touch on how we truly live. As I close the final pages, what echoes is not a number, not a theory, but a quiet question: how will we use the short life we have left? I hope that you have found in this book an opening, a pause for reflection, or a mirror to look back at your own life. If so, please share your feelings, because it is this dialogue that will make a book live on, beyond the limits of words. And if there is any book you long to hear, to explore together, please let me know. Perhaps it is a work you have hesitated to open, or a book you have read but want to see in a different light. I am ready to take the next step with you on a new journey, where ideas once again challenge and enrich us. Time passes, but this conversation can become a milestone. Thank you for choosing to stay until the very end.